I remember walking into the hospital, afraid. My intuition was telling me something bad was about to happen. I remember huddling up in my coat really tight, trying to find security anywhere that I could. And when the nurse handed me that hospital gown, it felt so light and fragile and frail in my hands. When I got it on and I walked into the room, I saw the table that they wanted me to lay down on and the straps that they had intended to thoroughly tie me down with. When I walked over to the table and laid back, that cold, sterile, white hospital room with the fluorescent lights just glared. I remember the gummy paste that they used to hook the electrodes to my head. The strap that they finally strapped my head down with, another across my shoulders, across my wrists, and across my ankles, right before they rolled this strobe light right in front of my face. I was here on this day because the doctors decided to conduct an experiment to induce seizures to see where mine were coming from. My mom was all about this. She was a Western medicine nurse. And although she was a culmination of 4 different tribes from the Northwest, the Flathead, the Umatilla, the Colville, and the Yakima tribes, she was raised by her mother, who was brought up in the government boarding schools for Native American children, where practicing your culture was harshly reprimanded. Consequently, my mom, she had a great deal of genetic and just lineage-type trauma that she held, and a lot of fear-based mentality. So her going into nursing was her answer to the uncertainties of life. I remember when they flipped that strobe light on, I remember telling myself, you can do this, you can override this, find your hochoka, pray, be strong. You see, my dad, he instilled this strong belief, this native culture into us kids and led our family in that way. He fought along the American Indian movement back in the day, and he ran the Indian part of the World's Fair in 1974 when it was held in Spokane, Washington. I was 6 months old at that time. This coat is his. My mom made it for him. I remember growing up, even though he worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs of the Kalispel tribe, we lived about 40 minutes off of the reservation. We pitched a teepee every single summer, and we would be out there, and he would have stories to tell us. My version of a sleepover was oftentimes all my friends, some Indian, some non-Indian, sitting around listening to my dad. He had this medicine bundle that he took everywhere with him. He would open up that bundle as we were sitting, and he would pull out this rock, and this rock fit beautifully, perfectly in the palm of his hand, and it was round and black and flat. He would roll that ball of sage and he'd put it on top of there, and he would light it, and he would tell us stories of spirit, of Wakampanka. He would tell us stories of legends, sometimes of Iktomi stories, which is the spider, which is the trickster. I knew that I was raised different. My connection to something more, my spirituality, reigned strong, far more than I saw of my peers. These tests began 4 years prior. It was an early January morning, right after I turned 11 years old. I was jarred out of sleep, disoriented, dizzy. So dizzy that it made it very difficult to get to my mom and dad's room. All that I could go off of was muscle memory. But I made my way out my door, across the living room, and rounded the corner, calling out to my dad, made around to his side of the bed and collapsed onto him in a grand mal seizure. The next thing I know, I'm in the back of our car, being summoned out of this deep slumber by this early morning sun pouring through the windows. The light was excruciating, so I pulled the blanket up over my head. The light had exasperated the already horrible migraine that I woke up to. I asked Mom and Dad where we were going, and they said, "We're going to the hospital, honey. It's going to be okay." But I could feel that that wasn't completely true. They weren't sure if I was going to be okay or not. There were many tests that day, and even more in the 4 years. And within those tests, none of which came back conclusive. That did not sit well with my mom. She wanted answers, but she surrendered to the notion that there may not be an answer. And so she started imbuing me with this belief in myself. She said, you can control this. You can control this. Go into your mind. You can control this. And she'd have me focus on the smallest little speck of dirt on the ground or the rock or that first letter of the title of that book sitting on the table in front of me. Whatever it was. And I remember during those 4 years, the mind control and the strength of spirit that I acquired was tremendous. The motivation in me was tremendous. Imagine being 13 years old, standing in the lunch line, feeling this oncoming presence of that dizzy spell, and wanting to transmute and rise above that. I remember sometimes when the dizzy spells would come on, if I was with Mom, I would sit down and I'd brace myself up against something to try not to fall over. And I'd focus my mind so hard. And I'd start to get visions. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I would oftentimes relay them to her, only to later see those visions come to fruition. And it come to my recollection that I was getting premonitions. Those 4 years built a tremendous amount of my connection to Tunkasha, to the Great Spirit, to the Creator. It strengthened that mind of mine. So when the idea of this experiment came about, my mom, again, she was so on board with this because 4 months prior, we had lost my sister to a completely unrelated scenario. I was the only one in my family that had ever had seizures to our knowledge. But my mom, having lost my sister, ignited this drive in her to find what was going on with her baby, to find out what was the matter. She had just lost a child and she was not going to lose another one. When we lost my sister, we ended up moving to a bigger city just for a brief period of time. And while we were there, my mom thought, well, bigger city, better doctors, let's find out. And then the doctors had this idea. So the experiment came, and I'm laying there on this table, and the strobe light's in front of me. And when it flips on, although I had all this strength of spirit already at that young age, I fought with everything I could, but I could feel it like a tidal wave coming over me. And when I felt my body going, and my mind literally kind of feels like it balls up, and then everything went black. And I began seizing. And I seized and seized and seized. And the medical personnel couldn't even get it to stop. My dad ran out to his truck, and he got his medicine bundle. And he brought in that medicine bundle, pushing through the medical personnel to get to me, and I'm still seizing. And he opens it up and he gets out that rock, and he has it in his palm, and he rolls that ball of sage and he puts it on top. And he always started his prayers the same way. He would say, "Oh, Wakantoka Tukashana, Shimalaya Bilo, Shimalaya Bilo, Shimalaya Bilo," which means, Great Spirit Grandfather, have pity on us. Take mercy upon us. We are pitiful. See us in that way. He said the moment that he smudged me, my seizures stopped. Like that. In an instant. So instantaneously that it dumbfounded the whole medical personnel. It was incontestable, the miracle that they witnessed that day. that was the last seizure I ever had. I imagine that was a very strong prayer that my dad said on that day. But those 4 years I honor because they built me. It built my center. My Hochoka gave me that ability and that understanding to be able to lean in and block everything out. So now in my life, I do energy work on people and friends. And I go far and wide with that. I have stood on the Giza Plateau among oceans of tourism, able to block out those big announcing things that they hold so that I could be able to hear spirit clearly. That is a skill that was built there. I have also been in the top of high-rise skyscrapers in New York City doing energy work on an elder. And it worked out just really well. I honor those years because they showed me the difference between faith and fear. That ability that my dad showed me, that spirituality that we all embody. We all come from something more, yeah? Or the fear-based mentality, the what-ifs of this life that we live. And we don't get to have both, we must choose. And what I have come to understand is that when we lean into who we truly are and choose that faith over fear, there's very little of this physical world that cannot be overcome. Hey, Chatu. And so it is. Thank you.